Fully inspired, fully engaged. You're tuning in to Reality with Vicki Gunvalson.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Reality with Vicki, and I'm so excited to have Laura Powers on today. I actually had a reading with her last week and it was very interesting. So I invited her back on today so you all the viewers can hear more about her. She's a celebrity medium and she's got some really good insights. So Laura, welcome to Reality with Vicki.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
We had a little bit of technical difficulty starting, and you had mentioned Mercury retrograde. So before we get into what you really do, what is going on right now with technology and just a lot of different things happening?
Yeah, so the planet Mercury has to do with things related to technology, communication, transportation, travel. So these areas are quite impacted during Mercury retrograde. And it's funny because there's also called the shadow period, which is before Mercury goes into retrograde. And even that, I already was having some tech issues. So, for those especially who are sensitive, depending on where it's on your chart, you will feel some strong things happening for you. So during Mercury retrograde times, I really recommend for people to ask for help from the angels. Raphael is a great angel to help for all of those things, as well as Archangel Michael. It's a good time to not try to cram things in, take a little extra time to get places. And especially if you're traveling or, going different places, just to make sure that you have patience, more awareness, just don't be like multitasking. And sometimes the tech stuff is just strange, and you can't even really explain it. I have 2 computers that I just can't get onto right now. Just by my lack of tech support.
Yeah, how long does this last for?
It typically lasts for about 3 weeks, and then there's the shadow periods as well. So we have, I'm not sure when people are going to be listening to this, but as we're recording, we have a little less than 2 weeks left.
Okay. Interesting, because, you've got these planets, and then you've got your horoscopes, and then you've got God, and it's like, how does all this, blend into each other? And that's sometimes a little bit confusing to me as a Christian, and people feel like sometimes, are you dealing with the devil? But you're not. I mean, this is the energy of the universe, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I came Catholic. I'm really family, so I completely understand these different perspectives, and that there sometimes can be skepticism and also concern about some of these things. But I feel like it's all a part of the universe and God in a way, just operating in a different way. And I mean, we literally are impacted by the stars and the planets and the moon, for example. I mean, all you have to look is the tides. That's because of the moon, guys. Like, so
Right.
Paying attention to this, I think, is very important because we are deeply impacted by what happens around us, including to these astral bodies. And they do have an impact. So just understanding them, even on a basic level, can help. So I really recommend, for example, for people to know when are the new moons, the full moons, and then these major kind of retrogrades are very helpful, just so that you psychologically can say, okay, that's what's going on. It can sometimes just even help with mentally just not being as stressed out about it when you know that it's happening.
And how often does that happen, the Mercury retrograde?
So I'd have to look, but I believe you get 3 in a calendar year for the Mercury retrogrades. And then some of the planets go retrograde much less frequently. So for example, this past year, 2020, was a very intense year astrologically. We had 6 eclipses, which is unusual. And then we had, I think it was at one point, we had 8 different planets in retrograde, which is like unheard of.
Wow.
So, if it felt crazy, that's probably at least partially why.
Well, the worldwide pandemic did make us all a little crazy, right? So
Yes.
I want to go back to what made you know that you had this intuition or this, gift.
Yeah, so I was very much like the kid in The Sixth Sense. I saw ghosts and spirits, sometimes like they were solid live people. In fact, it was very confusing for me because I saw things that other people didn't see. And for a long time, I thought that I was maybe crazy because other people didn't see what I did. And I learned to observe what other people saw. And if they didn't respond, then I thought, well, it's probably best not to bring this up. So I was just very careful about talking about certain things, but there were still times that were confusing and where I just didn't even realize. Like one time I called the cops on a ghost, and like, 5 cops came with their guns drawn because I thought there was an intruder in the house, and it was a spirit, so it was confusing for me. I didn't talk about it. And then when I was in college, a family friend described a ghost that I had seen but never told anyone about. So that was a really life-changing moment for me, because I knew at that point that I wasn't crazy, but I was still pretty terrified because I didn't really know what to do with all of that. I didn't have teachers in my life at that point. And it's very different now with the internet being as developed as it is, because you can find teachers on anything. You can find a course, you can, find books on this stuff. And I'm very passionate about teaching people with abilities how to tap in, because that was literally like because what happened is I had these abilities, didn't really know what to do about it. And so I blocked them out, or I tried to block them out. And then I ended up in a very bad place in my life. I was physically ill. I was unemployed. I was in a very bad marriage that I suddenly realized, instantly was bad. Like I didn't realize it until all of a sudden I knew how bad it was, based on some things I found out. And my life was a mess, and I went to a psychic to just try to get help and guidance. And without her knowing, without me telling her that I had these abilities and shut them out, she basically explained to me that when I shut out my ability, I shut out my intuition, and I really needed to open them back up. She also explained to me about angels, which I had known about in theory. Like, I knew they were there and had an understanding of that, but I didn't realize that we as individuals, we as humans, as people, could ask angels for help in our daily lives. So I invited the angels in, and I had an incredible angelic visitation experience. And even though I was in a very dark place in my life at that time, still, like I was still in this bad marriage, I was still physically ill, I had no money. This was all during the recession that this was playing out for me. As soon as I had that angelic visitation experience, I knew that I was going to be okay. And it completely transformed my life. So at that point, I started taking classes, really just to get my life back together. And through the process of taking classes, I would do practice readings, and people would start to say, wow, you're really good at this. And so I kind of just went into it that way with people asking for readings, and it just developed very quickly from there.
So is this your full-time job now? Is it?
Yes,
Do people reach out to you to do readings, and
mm-hmm.
and you, because when we had our reading, it was really interesting. You had mentioned about a book, and I've written 4 books, but you were pretty adamant about me writing another book. And I wrote those things down, and I know you had an opportunity to talk to my friend afterwards, and she said, she's got some pretty strong viewpoints on a book. And it was interesting because I had never thought about doing a book, but now it's in my mind, I got to do a book. So it's interesting how you picked up on that. I've got some other questions for you.
Sure.
Why do you think people are uncomfortable with this? Is it because the unknown and feeling like maybe the devil will come in if we open up those gates? Like, what is the fear? Because I know I had.
Yeah, I think there's definitely fear of the unknown and things that we don't understand. And this is a part of, human abilities and part of this world that has been really suppressed. I think part of suppressing, in a lot of ways, suppressing feminine abilities and gifts. Intuition is really aligned with women, and a lot of women are very naturally intuitive and psychic. And I think that's part of this sort of feminine and masculine energies and how they break up. But there's also an element of when women have children, they're literally a channel for the divine, like, a child, a new being coming through. So a lot of, for example, mothers are very psychic, and the more children they have, the more psychic they become. It's very fascinating because they're a channel for this opening to the other side. So that's something that I've become aware of recently. So I think some of this is actually kind of the suppressing of women and women's wisdom, our approach, and anything that can't be controlled. With the church, and specifically with the Catholic Church, there's a lot of things that happen that I think a lot of people don't have awareness of. So I believe that Jesus, I think he's a wonderful being in spirit, and I think he's incredible. But when the church was founded around him, a lot of his followers made decisions that were not about him and his teachings, but really about the power of the church. So, for example, there were mentions of reincarnation in the Bible at one point, were taken out by the emperor. So just, things like that. I mean, if you know that you're going to reincarnate, or that this is a thing and you can do it over again, that kind of can be perceived to take away power from the church. So a lot of people don't understand some of these dynamics that happened early on in the church that really changed people's perspective on the sort of spiritual world and principles.
Well, I do believe there's definitely a spiritual world. One of my very dearest friends' daughter, one of Brianna's friends as well, lost her baby in the delivery. And so she's mourning. It's been 11 months. And so she'll post like, there's a rainbow with two doves, or there's a rainbow with a dove sitting basically right next to me. And she's constantly posting these interesting viewpoints that she has. So I see that and I say there has to be something to this. There has to be something to just the spirit living on. I mean, I'm here in Mexico right now, where my mom and dad founded our first home here. And whenever I'm here, I just feel super close to both of them. They're both passed on. And I don't know if it's just a feeling that's here, or if it's their spirits here saying, job well done, Vicki, you're here, you're doing your podcast, we're proud of you, or what have you. But it does give me comfort knowing that their spirit is here. So I don't know, those of you that are listening, if you've ever had those intuitions, but it's real, right? It's not something we can just imagine. And when you talked about intuition in women, I think many of us do not follow our gut. And I have been guilty of that. And, I'm trying to get more in tuned with the spirit or my gut and saying, okay, doesn't feel right. Don't press it. Don't press on with it. Don't do it. Because sometimes I'm a bulldog and I just feel like it's my way or the highway. And I know that that's not the right way to be as a human and as a woman, but that intuition is pretty alive, I think, for a lot of us, and we want to stuff it and not follow it, right?
Absolutely. I think this is a huge problem. We're taught to be very analytical, very logical, to use critical thinking, and those things are wonderful. But if they're not balanced with this inner knowing, because something can logically make sense and be absolutely the wrong thing to do, right? And I believe that if you're given a choice between using intuition and logic, usually the intuition is the one that makes the most sense to use, in terms of just what I found with my experience. And so we're just not taught to do that. I mean, we don't have classes when we're young learning to listen to our intuition or meditate. And some of these tools, yoga and meditation, for example, what they do is help us really tune in with ourselves more. So even though it's not like psychic training per se, it helps us lead to those things. And the other piece that I think is really important to think about is we in our lives tend to be very busy, and we can't kind of hear our inner messages when our active and full of thought. So it's important to have some kind of quiet, receptive time in our lives, whether that's taking a walk, whether that's, taking a bath and relaxing, whether that's, sometimes people like sit in quiet meditation. Sometimes people like these kind of more moving meditations to help them channel. And you brought up, being in Mexico and how you just feel more connected. I think being in nature is an incredible way to access our connections more strongly. And then there are certain places where I think there's just a stronger opening. So certain places in Mexico, New Zealand that came up the other day, Hawaii, we're often drawn to these places when we really need to kind of connect our inner self. And in terms of connecting with our intuition, our bodies are one of the first places that we're able to have that soul spirit connection. And you mentioned listening to your gut. So a lot of our sort of psychic abilities and intuition comes in through the gut and the brain. So our third eye is believed to be in the pineal gland, which is in the center of the brain. And then our gut, where we're used to thinking of like gut instinct, is the place where we have the second highest number of neurons in the body. So we tend to think of neurons in the brain, but they're in the gut as well. So there's this gut-brain connection. One, better intuiting, we also would do well to pay attention to our health and our gut health and our brain health. And if you have poor digestion, your brain is also probably struggling because of this gut-brain connection. So that's one of the first things you can do is start cleaning up your diet, doing things that are good for your body and your digestion, and that will also help your intuition and tapping in.
I love that, because when I'm nervous or stressed, I have diarrhea. So that tells me right there that this and this are connected. And it just means I don't have to get the details, but when my tummy's upset, that means the brain is not solid. I have some stress going
Under
on.
stress.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, we have an epidemic of poor health in this country. And one of the things I think COVID has shown is that we are just unhealthy society. Now, COVID is definitely real, a big problem, but the stronger we are, the better we're able to handle these big things. And then also the better we're able to, so I'm a huge fan of that. And I started my podcast, Healing Powers podcast, where we talk about mind, body, spirit, like how all of these things connect. Because unfortunately, I feel most of the time in our society, everything is very separated. It's like, go to the doctor for the physical, maybe you go to your priest or, whatever
Right.
thing you have spiritual for that. And then you go to a counselor for the emotional, when really it's all connected. And we really need to understand that they're connected and view them that way.
Interesting. One of the other questions I have for you, I've got a couple of them. After we talked, I was really interested in what you had to say on many different areas, personal, business, the book, all these different things. But what do you think is one of your biggest successes with one of your clients? Because I think that's interesting. So do you have premonition on what would happen, or are you more like, this is where you're at this time in your life, or this is what I see you doing? What is the goal when people come and reach out to you, and what has been your biggest success for that person?
Sure. Gosh, I do a lot of different things. So it really depends on what I'm doing, because I do like animal communication. I connect with spirits on the other side. And then I can also see people's futures or potential futures. And I say potential futures because it really depends on our choices. Like, we're constantly making choices. And I believe that we have free will. And so what we experience in our lives can change depending on what we choose, what we decide each moment of every day, which is beautiful. That means that we can shift and change what we're attracting to ourselves and what we're creating. So what's coming to mind is a story about a client, and I can talk about this because she's talked about it. So obviously with clients, I don't share things. Yeah. And she's a client that's been a longtime client, used to live in Los Angeles, and she always wanted to move to Hawaii. And the very first reading, I said, your family's going to move to Hawaii. And she said, yes, that's our plan. They worked in Los Angeles. Her husband worked for one of the big studios. And so it was in 2019, they were thinking to purchase and just kind of wait to move there till after retirement. And I said, yes, you should definitely purchase. But I said, I'm getting you can move there sooner. And this was like 6 months before then. It was like fall of 2019. And they were planning on waiting until retirement to actually move. And I said, I'm getting that your husband's going to be able to work from home starting in March. And then you'll probably move out there next summer. And she reported that to her husband, and she's very open to this. And he's like open, but not as much of a full-on believer. And he said, there's no way. He worked at one of the studios. There's no way he was going to be able to work from home. Right. And then the pandemic hit. Everyone's working from home, and they decided to expedite their timeline due to COVID and move there in, I believe it was June of this past year. So that's the thing with the psychic realm. I want everyone to understand that, like, as a medium, I'm getting the information from my guides, and they don't tell me everything, and whatever they don't tell me, it's for a reason, meaning maybe it wasn't safe or the right thing for me to know about COVID directly. I just knew some of the impacts that this was going to have on them. And that's one of the hardest things with intuition, is sometimes we want to know the why, or we want the whole picture, and we only get pieces. And even as a psychic, like, I can only relay what they're telling me. Like, I'm a medium. I'm not making it up myself, right? It's like a go-between from the spirit realm. So that's one example of a very profound thing that played out. And when they listened to it and they didn't fight it, things turned out very well. So they're in Hawaii now. Of course, they were very protected from some of these intense things in Hawaii during this time, and that's ultimately where they wanted to go. And then I have another client, and this is another one that's a public figure, so I can share because he's shared. So he came to me several years ago. His name is Mark Gober, and he was a partner in a Silicon Valley tech firm. And he just found me through podcasting and connected. And I said to him, your path involves teaching and speaking about the spiritual realm. And eventually this is going to be your work. You're going to write a book, and that's going to be your work. And at the time I could just tell, was like, yeah, I don't know about that. So I've learned not to feel badly if someone isn't, sometimes it takes a while
That's
for people
not,
to
yeah.
process something. Yeah. And so a year later, he wrote the book. A year later, he released it. It was a bestseller. And then he started speaking, teaching. He started a podcast on spirituality, and his work is on the scientific aspect of consciousness. So like, where is our consciousness? Where does it reside? The studies of that scientifically, psychic issue, stuff. What's going on there scientifically? So he just released a second book this past summer. He quit his job last year and is now working on this full time. And he references me all the time in his work. So I just want people to know that when something is spiritually aligned for us, even if it makes no sense or a logical mind is struggling with it, it's when we listen, things go more. And also sometimes we just haven't seen the full picture yet. And then eventually things will fall into place so that it comes together for us.
Crazy. So you don't hear like voices, do you? Or is it just a thought that goes in your head?
Well, I do sometimes hear voices, especially with earthbound spirits. It sounds like someone's, whispering in my ear. And by the way, I mean, when I was growing up, I literally was like, I think I'm crazy. I just knew I was really different. I felt like an alien in a lot of ways because I just knew I was interacting so differently with the world. And what I've now realized is that a lot of what comes in for me telepathically, meaning it's like, it feels like a thought. So I actually still sometimes have a challenge to figure out what's my thought and what's just something coming in. So I will frequently answer people's unasked questions just because I receive it and then I just think to say it. But it's what I use through my work. And then as I've gotten training, I've been better able to differentiate what it is that I want to engage with. Because, there's angels of the light and then there are not helpful beings. I think of them as like energy parasites, beings that are, have their own interest in mind, aren't there to help us. And I'm getting to say that our thoughts, for those who are sensitive or have abilities in this area, will be comprised of a lot of different things. So what you think of as your thought, and I'm kind of putting that in quotes, could be your thought. It could be your angels communicating with you. It could be your next door neighbor. It could be your dog. It could be your parents. It could be your loved one. So it's quite complex. And the more you learn how to differentiate what's yours and not yours, the better things go for you. And also, whether it's yours or not, it's important to think about, is this something I want to engage with? So whether it's a thought being generated by you or it's coming externally, in a way, it doesn't matter. Is it loving? Is it kind? Is it helpful? And if it's not, probably best not to engage with it. And our angels and spirit guides will only be loving and kind to us. So
okay, that's so good to know. Okay, I have more questions. This is really good. I wrote this down the other day after we talked. Did you have a feeling or an insight or some thought about COVID and what was going to be happening to so many people? And most people have suffered greatly over this financially. There are those people that have flourished over COVID because of their business model database that was successful, such as Zoom. I never did a Zoom call with any of my clients, and we now know we're on Zoom right now. Zoom is now a household name. My grandchildren 6 and 8 are on Zoom, teaching platforms. So tell me about your thoughts on this COVID, and do you have any thoughts on when everything's going to get back to normal? Because that's what I'm waiting for.
This is a big question. So it's not that I knew this pandemic was coming, but I felt something big coming. Like I knew something big was coming. And the other piece is just like those clients that were LA and then Hawaii based, where I would get pieces of information that were important for people. And it was relating to the changes that were coming. So I've been primarily online for like 4 or 5 years and been using Zoom for podcasting for my clients. And so I was doing that. And then I started getting the message to teach this stuff to help people with transitioning. And there were several clients that for years, I was like, they had a brick and mortar store. I was like, you've got to get online. You have to get online. You have to start a podcast. You do these things. Guides didn't tell me there's a pandemic coming. They just said, these are the things you need to do. So again, it's that kind of fight sometimes with our logical analytical mind and intuition, because on a logical level, they're like, my business is awesome. It's doing great. Why, this seems like a lot of work to get online. Right. And of course, now a lot of those people are now going the process getting online because they have to. Like you literally have to have some kind of online presence, even if you have a brick and mortar, even for people to order, whatever it is. you
Right.
know, it has to
Food orders
happen.
for restaurants and all that. I know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hopeful that 2021 will be much better for so many. For me, I never conduct Zoom meetings with my clients. It was a face-to-face. I do workshops and seminars at a restaurant, and I teach them about retirement planning and insurance. And, in February, everything stopped for my practice. And I was able to sustain keeping my staff employed. But I'm going to tell you, it's been hard. I mean, 2020 slapped me in the face. And I was fortunate enough that I did have a reserve in my company's account that I was able to just maintain that. But it's not been easy for a lot of us. And so I want those of you that are listening, that if you are suffering from this pandemic with your business, it will, I'm going to say this hopefully, and hopefully you agree with me, Laura, it will get back to normal. It can't stay this way for forever. I mentioned I'm in Mexico right now, and we have a curfew here at 10 p.m. We have to get back home by 10, and everybody's abiding by it. If you're over 60, which I'm not, I'm 58, you cannot go to a store. They card you.
Wow,
So
I didn't know that.
here in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta, you can't go to Costco. You can, there's limitations on what you can do. So if you're 6 years old, please leave the store. And it's like, well, now we're being carded at 60 and over. So this has affected so many people and so many lives. And we see the tourists still here. They're still coming in. The planes are still coming in. People are masked up. We are conscious about the COVID, but we're not living in fear. Like the Canadians, my girlfriend's a Canadian, and she lives in fear in Canada. And it's just really too bad, because life is now too. And we need to try to get all these countries back resuming. So I wanted to get your insight on that. So I could go on to COVID for forever, but I'm not going to. I'm going to pass on.
If I could just add one thing about all that, because, yes, I have so much compassion. This is a really tough time for many people. But I also want to share that when things are tough, that usually, in fact, in my experience, means there's always something good coming, even if we don't know what that is. Especially from a spiritual perspective, it's always darkest before the light. And I feel like what's happening on a spiritual level with COVID is this is a mass kind of shift, realignment. And that's not to say that it's easy during the process. So for me, this round, meaning during the pandemic time, wasn't as hard for me, but boy, was the recession so tough for me. Like literally my whole life just kind of fell apart, but so that it could come together in a much better way. So if you're feeling like, this is so horrible, just know there's something good coming around the corner, and it may be even better than what you could imagine for yourself. And a lot of it is about letting go of things that aren't in alignment for us. And there are a lot of things that are coming from COVID that I think are really good things. Like we've had this culture of you have to push through, you have to just, even if you're sick as a dog, just go to work, and these things this is not healthy. We need to listen to our bodies.
Yeah.
We need to
for a good pause button, right?
Yeah. And just like our bodies are telling us we need to slow down, our bodies are telling us we need to listen. And so I think that's one of the positive aspects. And in terms of how long this plays out, I think there will be some permanent societal changes, as a result of COVID, but I do think we will get back to somewhat normalcy, in time. And I think it's going to kind of come in starts and stops. And some of these bigger things, like really big conferences, festivals, and events, maybe years in the making to come back to similar to what they were before. But we're all being asked to do this inner work, to shift whatever isn't in alignment for us. And also I want to share that whatever is happening in society, you can do well individually. And if you're really struggling, it probably means you're also very empathic. And it's important to learn how to have energy boundaries so that you're not literally taking on the pain and struggle of everyone in the world. So I'm an empath. We
talked about that. Yeah, we talked about empathy and empath, and I never heard empath before. So those of you that are listening, you got to look up what empath is. I'm very empathetic. Somebody has a problem, I got to try to fix it, or, with my staff or my family. And you can't take everything on yourself, but that's just who I am. It's an empathic. Is it the right word? Empathic personality.
Yeah. Being an empath or being empathic. Absolutely. And the challenge is, what a lot of empaths try to do is they don't feel good because they feel what other people are feeling. If other people are feeling badly, they try to kind of fix the other person. And that's a roundabout way of doing it. And often it's literally impossible. That person is going through whatever soul journey they're going through, whatever lessons they're going through. And a lot of times their pain has to do with something that they need to learn and experience for their soul growth. So the much more effective and easier way for an empath to feel better is to work on their lessons, their shifting, releasing other people's pain and energy, and trying to understand, like, why am I trying to do this? A lot of times on a deeper soul level, empaths are in the sort of martyr pattern, but not on as deep of a level. So they're trying to save others by sacrificing themselves.
Ooh, I don't want to do that.
No.
We're going to get ready to close up, but I have one last question. Why do we ignore the red flags? Why do we as humans sometimes say, you know what, I got this? And what can we do to teach ourselves to be more aware of those red flags? I think this is really a great question.
Sure. So I think there's a couple parts to this. One is that we want to see the good. We don't want to believe that something maybe not be panning out as we want to, or that a person, has negative intentions, or, is not being kind, etc. And it's lovely to see the light, but people also have shadow side, and it's important to acknowledge and see the whole picture. And the other part is that, especially as women, we're very taught to be nice, to give people second chances, to be accommodating. So I think it's a complex issue, but it's about seeing things for what they are rather than what we want them to be. And then it's also about listening to ourselves and not just the programming or messaging that we've been taught in society. And women in particular are taught to be the nurturers, the healers, the helpers, often at their own detriment. So there's a lot of changes that need to happen in our society to help us really, be good for ourselves. And also, you can't truly help someone else if you're not in a good place yourself. Right. So this is really, really important.
That related to my daughter, Brandon, who's got a 2-month-old and a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old that are sitting in front of Zoom cameras. And she just said to me, Mom, I'm so exhausted. I haven't slept. I'm tired. Everybody wants to eat all the time. And it was that she's not taking care of herself at all. I mean, she is, but she isn't. And she needs sleep. She needs to she's only as good as she is. And so she can pass it on to her kids. And I think when you mentioned mothers, it made me think of Brianna, because she's such an incredible mother and wife that, she will sacrifice her happiness and herself and her eating and sleeping for her children. And I think many, many people listening understand, like, this is tough stuff. If you're homeschooling your child and you've never homeschooled before, and you're putting them in front of Zoom for 6 or 8 hours or 5 hours a day, that's not easy. So I have empathy for all of you that are listening to this podcast today. But Laura, I wanted to thank you. We're going to wrap up soon, and just tell our listeners and viewers how they can reach out to you.
Sure. So my website for the psychic work is healingpowers.net. So my name is Laura Powers. So it's tied in with my last name, healingpowers.net. And you can find my podcast, Healing Powers Podcast, where we go deep dive into all these things that we talked about today on the show. You can find me on social media, Instagram at Laura Powers 44, and on Facebook. And then my email, if people want to reach out, is bookings with an S at laurapowers.net. Love to connect with people. And I teach psychic classes if people want to access and learn how to tap into their own abilities, as well as do readings for people.
Great. Well, thank you so much. My very best to you in 2021. And if you have like a calling or something's going on through your mind, don't forget to call me and let me know what's going on. So, okay.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and stay tuned for next week. Bye.
Now, glutathione is a big word, but it's the body's own master antioxidant. So it's a scavenger for free radicals, for bacteria, and what's relevant now, viruses. This is new to the marketplace. There's no other product on the market that has the ingredient NACET.
And basically NACET increases the production of that glutathione that is in our body already to strengthen and enhance our immune system and keep it strong. Elevated sense of well-being, supports muscle strength and endurance, cognitive function, powerful liver support, energy, helps blood sugar regulation, superior bioavailability of key ingredients,
one of your best defenses against COVID
Mhm.
is a strong immune system. Taking GSH Plus as a daily supplement does all that. And now we have the product out on the marketplace.